Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the complexities of conflict and the art of warfare. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're going to explore one of the most pivotal battles of the Korean War, the Battle of the Hook, fought in 1952. This intense and bloody engagement would prove to be a defining moment in the war, showcasing the tactical prowess and strategic vision of the combatants involved. The Hook, a strategic hill outpost, was situated near the town of Panmunjom in the demilitarized zone that separated North and South Korea. This critical location would become the linchpin of a maelstrom of violence as United Nations command forces, led by the 1st Battalion, Duke of Wellington's regiment, clashed with the Chinese People's Volunteer Army. To understand the origins of this battle, we must rewind to the summer of 1951, when the Korean War had reached a stalemate. The armistice talks at Panmunjom had begun on July 10, 1951, but fighting continued unabated along the front lines. As the negotiations dragged on, both sides sought to gain a strategic advantage, which would ultimately lead to the Battle of the Hook. The United Nations Command, under the leadership of General James Van Fleet, was determined to hold its ground and prevent the enemy from gaining a foothold on the strategic high ground. In the months leading up to the battle, the Chinese and North Korean forces had been bolstering their positions, pouring troops and supplies into the area. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army, led by General Deng Hua, had been reinforced with fresh troops and equipment, including artillery and mortars. Meanwhile, the United Nations Command had been strengthening its defenses along the Jamestown line, constructing bunkers, trenches, and barbed wire entanglements to protect against enemy attacks. The terrain itself played a significant role in shaping the battle. The Hook, a rugged and rocky outcropping, offered a commanding view of the surrounding landscape, making it a crucial vantage point for artillery spotting and reconnaissance. The nearby village of Panmunjom, with its thatched roof huts and dusty streets, would become a key battleground as troops on both sides fought for control of the village and the surrounding hills. The United Nations Command, comprising troops from 16 countries, including the United States, Britain, Canada, and Australia, was committed to defending South Korea against the communist forces of North Korea and China. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army, on the other hand, was driven by a desire to spread communism throughout the Korean peninsula and to protect its own borders from perceived threats. The battle would be shaped by the complex interplay of terrain, tactics, and technology, as well as the courage and sacrifice of the soldiers who fought on both sides. The United Nations Command would employ innovative tactics, including helicopter-borne assaults and artillery strikes, to counter the enemy's superior numbers. Meanwhile, the Chinese People's Volunteer Army would rely on its traditional strengths, including human wave attacks and clever use of camouflage, to try and overwhelm the defenders. The Battle of the Hook began on November 18, 1952, as the Chinese People's Volunteer Army launched a series of probing attacks against the United Nations Command's positions along the Jamestown line. The initial assaults were repelled by the defenders, but the Chinese forces continued to apply pressure, seeking to exploit any weaknesses in the United Nations defenses. As the battle raged on, the United Nations Command's artillery played a crucial role in blunting the Chinese attacks. Gunners from the British Royal Artillery and the U.S. Army's 25th Infantry Division poured shellfire onto the enemy positions, inflicting heavy casualties and disrupting their supply lines. Meanwhile, the defenders of the Hook hunkered down in their bunkers and trenches, weathering a storm of small arms fire, mortar bombs, and artillery shells. One notable example of the bravery and sacrifice displayed during this battle was the actions of Lieutenant Colonel James Carney, commander of the 1st Battalion, Duke of Wellington's regiment. As the Chinese forces closed in on his position, Carney rallied his men and led a series of counterattacks against the enemy, buying time for reinforcements to arrive. His leadership and tactical acumen would prove instrumental in holding the line against overwhelming odds. The battle saw extensive use of innovative tactics and technology, including the deployment of helicopters by the United Nations Command. These aircraft provided critical air support, ferrying troops and supplies into the combat zone, while also conducting medical evacuations and reconnaissance missions. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army, on the other hand, relied on more traditional methods, employing human wave attacks and clever use of camouflage to try and overwhelm the defenders. As the fighting continued, both sides suffered significant losses. The United Nations Command estimated that over 1,500 Chinese soldiers were killed or wounded during the battle, while their own casualties numbered around 300. Despite being outnumbered, the defenders of the Hook held firm, thanks in part to the timely arrival of reinforcements and the effective use of artillery support. The outcome of the Battle of the Hook would have far-reaching consequences for the war and its participants. The successful defense of the Jamestown Line denied the Chinese People's Volunteer Army a strategic advantage, preventing them from gaining control of the high ground and limiting their ability to launch further attacks against the United Nations Command. Moreover, the battle demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms warfare, showcasing the importance of coordination between infantry, artillery, air support, and logistics in modern combat. The Battle of the Hook marked a significant turning point in the Korean War, as it denied the Chinese People's Volunteer Army a strategic advantage and prevented them from gaining control of the high ground. This outcome had far-reaching consequences for the war, as it limited the enemy's ability to launch further attacks against the United Nations Command. The successful defense of the Jamestown Line also demonstrated the effectiveness of combined arms warfare, showcasing the importance of coordination between infantry, artillery, air support, and logistics in modern combat. In the months following the Battle of the Hook, the war began to transition from a mobile, fluid conflict to a more static, trench warfare-style engagement. Both sides dug in along the Jamestown Line, constructing elaborate networks of bunkers, trenches, and fortifications. The United Nations Command continued to hold the high ground, while the Chinese People's Volunteer Army controlled the lower-lying areas. As the war settled into this new phase, the focus shifted from large-scale battles to smaller, more localized skirmishes. Patrols and reconnaissance missions became increasingly important as both sides sought to gather intelligence on the enemy's dispositions and intentions. The United Nations Command also began to emphasize the use of artillery and air support, seeking to wear down the enemy through a campaign of relentless bombardment. The aftermath of the Battle of the Hook also saw significant developments in the diplomatic sphere. In July 1953, after 2 years of negotiations, the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed, bringing a fragile peace to the Korean Peninsula. The agreement established a ceasefire, created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, and paved the way for the eventual withdrawal of foreign troops from Korea. The Battle of the Hook had a profound impact on the soldiers who fought it, with many experiencing significant physical and emotional trauma. The intense fighting and prolonged periods of bombardment took a heavy toll on the defenders, with some units suffering casualty rates of over 50%. The battle also saw the awarding of numerous decorations for valor, including several Victoria Crosses and Medals of Honor. In the years following the war, the Battle of the Hook was largely forgotten, overshadowed by more prominent engagements like the Battle of Incheon and the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. However, in recent years, there has been a growing recognition of the battle's significance, with many historians and veterans advocating for its importance to be acknowledged. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.